Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Hey everyone, welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast. So glad you're joining us. Now, Alexander Graham Bell and Elisha Gray filed some ideas for transmitting sound at the exact same day at the Patent Office, February 14th, 1876. We know that idea now today as the telephone. Now, Alexander Graham Bell happened to get there first. In fact, he was the fifth person on record today to file for an idea at the Patent Office. Now, Gray, on the other hand, kind of took his time, sent an attorney. That attorney arrived 1 hour after Alexander Graham Bell, but those minutes cost Gray a fortune. Now, Alexander Graham Bell was held up in court as the one who got the rights to the patent because he filed first. Even though Gray actually had the idea first, Bell getting there early and beating out Gray gave him a great fortune. That little extra made a big difference in terms of dividends and payoff. I want to talk about extraordinary leadership today. It's the little extra in the ordinary that causes us to have extraordinary results, extraordinary success. See, we often think it's some big achievement, it's some big project, it's this next big thing that I'm going to achieve, when in actuality, when you really unpack the life of extraordinary leaders, it's often an accumulation of the little extra things that they did that truly made them the extraordinary leaders that they became. And so that's encouraging because we might not be able to do the big thing, but all of us can do the little extra things that, when accumulated, will cause us to be extraordinary as leaders. Extraordinary as a husband, extraordinary as a parent, extraordinary as a volunteer inside of church, extraordinary on staff in company or leading your business. So we're going to look at the extras. Now, I want to look at a great leader inside of the Bible. His name is David. In fact, David, by God's definition, was really the Midas standard by which every king in Israel's history was measured against. He was the extraordinary leader. But when you really unpack his life, it was really a bunch of little extra things that David did that made him so extraordinary as a leader. Now, when we think of David, we think of, that young kid who killed Goliath. But what a lot of people don't see is the little extra things that enabled David to become a giant killer. And so we're going to unpack some things from David to find the extras that he did. So I want to read to you Psalm 78, verses 70 through 72. He chose David, his servant, took him from the sheep pens, from tending the sheep. He brought him to be the shepherd of his people. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, skillful of hands. He led them. There's three parts of an extraordinary leader, and all three of these matter. There's the hands, there's the head, and there's the heart. First, I want to talk about the heart. David had skillful hands. God didn't choose David to be a giant killer just because he had a great heart. He also had great hands. See, a lot of leaders go to this ditch of, it really is only about the heart. Well, yeah, you have to have a great heart, but you also better have skillful hands. See, David could have showed up with a great heart and said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Let me at him." But if he didn't know how to use a slingshot and he didn't know how to pick up a rock and sling it, David would have died while having a great heart. There's a lot of churches that are struggling. There's a lot of businesses that are struggling. They got a good heart, but they haven't developed their skillful hands. I want to use these podcasts to help skillfully improve your hands. Now, the second thing that we see about David is he also had a good head. He had a good head on his shoulders. 1 Samuel 18, verse 14 says, "And David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him." In fact, that chapter says 4 times, David behaved wisely. David knew how to think as a leader. David had good strategy. He was wise in the way he thought, in the way he processed. He had high emotional intelligence as he was interacting with people. All that is an important part of our success. I want to encourage us to continually improve the way we think and the way we approach problems. I like what Albert Einstein said. He said, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. That's really good. So if you got a problem, chances are you created it. But if you don't change something in how you see it and the way you think about it, chances are you aren't going to be able to fix it because it was that same state of mind that created it. And the third thing was this, and I think this is what truly made David extraordinary, and that was his heart. 2 Samuel 6:14 says, David danced before the Lord with all his might. One of the things we see always about David is he was all out in terms of his heart for God. Anything he did, it was all out in terms of his heart and his passion for God. The Bible says, above all else, guard your heart. Jesus defined the greatest commandments as to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, soul, and strength. Just a little side note, if you're a leader and you're leading others, these three words are really important as kind of a filter. And when you're coaching or you have a challenge with an employee, you want to coach someone up. You're confronting somewhere that maybe the ball's dropping. And that is really ask this question, is it a matter of their hands, a matter of their head, or a matter of their heart? Because maybe they just need to be equipped on how to manage their time, how to, structure, how to problem solve, how to just to get better at a skill. So you can coach that. You can equip that with their hands. Maybe it's how they need to think, maybe how they need to see things differently. So you can maybe coach their mind. Or ask, is this a heart problem? Here's what I have found. It's really hard to change somebody's heart. In fact, you can't change somebody's heart. So unless they're willing to change their heart, it would be better to take that employee and just move them along. But I will work with people who have a good heart, who just need to be coached in their hands and coached up in their head, because only I can manage my heart. I love the story of Mother Teresa, somebody who truly was an extraordinary leader. There was a reporter that was interviewing Mother Teresa, and she was down on the ground and she was washing this leper's wounds. And the stench and smell from that skin that was decaying was so strong, the reporter had to cover their mouth with a rag. And that reporter said, I wouldn't do that for $1 million. And Mother Teresa just stopped, looked up and said, neither would I. And then she continued to wash the wounds. What is that? That's a heart. That's an all-out, extraordinary heart. See, when I look at Mother Teresa, history remembers her not because of some company she built, some technological advancement she gave civilization. History remembers Mother Teresa because she was truly extraordinary in her heart. I've been studying a lot of technological leaders, people who have been innovators in the last 100 years. And something I've noticed as a pattern, they have great achievements, but many of them, it's at the expense of their character. It's at the expense of their heart. They've achieved much. They're remembered for what they did. But when you really measure up their character, their marriages were a mess. Their life was full of all kinds of infidelity. They were harsh to their employees. They overworked people, overworked themselves. They were mean. They weren't fun to be around. And at the end of the day, yeah, they got a lot done. But you know what? I would never want to become them. Yeah, maybe they did a lot, but at the end of the day, I like who I'm becoming a whole lot more than what they've done. Here's what I've just decided as a leader. I'd rather achieve less to become more. If I had to choose a greater heart or more achievements, I'm going to choose a greater heart all day long. Because at the end of the day, when our works go through the fire before God, there's going to be a lot of things that, yeah, maybe it was done great and maybe it was big, but because it wasn't done with the right heart, it was done out of jealousy, or it was done out of bitterness, it was done out of competitive, I'm going to prove to somebody I'm something. It was selfish in some way. It wasn't for God, with God, through God. At the end of the day, it's just wood, hay, and stubble, and it's going to burn up. And you know what? What's going to really remain? My heart, my character, who I became at the end of the day. That is really what's going to matter. So, yes, improve your hands. Yes, continue to grow your mind. But not at the expense of the extraordinary heart that truly causes us to become extraordinary leaders. Join us next week. We're going to get very practical as we unpack some of the little extra things that made David extraordinary. See you next week.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.